Hello everyone, welcome to 901 Woodworking. I'm Hubert Mace, and I know it's been a while since I've put out a video. A lot of reasons, the last couple of months have kept me out of the wood shop, but we're back here now and we're going to have some exciting projects coming. Today we're going to do a fairly simple one, something that you should be able to get done within a day, depending on how fast your finish dries. We're going to make this clock. It's made out of a single barrel stave and one of the hoops from the barrel. The clock mechanism I use is from clockparts.com, and I'm not sponsored by them, but I found that they work very well and I would recommend that you use them as well. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. The clock is fairly large. It's about 23.5 inches in diameter, and so I use the heavy-duty mechanism. This also works with these larger hands, which I will leave a link to in the description as well. They also come from clockparts.com, and they work with this particular mechanism. It's a simple electric mechanism, uses a C-cell battery. I also use a special plate that I got from Rockler that I use to hang the clock with. But we'll get into that later. So, with that, let's get started. The first step in making the clock is to choose a stave and a ring that you think will look pleasing. I've chosen this stave. It's a fairly wide stave. It doesn't have to be this wide, but if you look at the clock mechanism, it needs to be at least as wide as that, because otherwise the mechanism is going to overhang the sides of the stave and it'll be visible. So this stave is plenty wide. There's some extra hanging over the sides, which should be nice. It covers up the look of the mechanism and should look good. I've also chosen this particular ring. It's about 23.5 inches in diameter, which is a good diameter. And the thickness is up to you. It can be whatever you want. These rings come in different thicknesses depending on how the barrel is made. So it's really just a question of your own choice and what you think looks good. The next step is to mark the center of the stave, because we need to drill a 7/16 inch hole to fit the bore of the clock mechanism. Now that we have the center marked, let's take it over to the drill press and drill our hole. With the hole drilled, now we'll take our mechanism and mark on the back of the stave the outline of the mechanism, because we need to hollow out this area so that the mechanism has a flat area to sit against. Since all these surfaces are curved, nothing is flat on these staves. Just trace around that. We go back to the drill press and hollow it out. In order to make my life a little easier in hollowing out the back of the stave, I have created a jig which holds the piece, and with a Forstner bit set to the correct depth, I know that the thickness of the stave left over after I've drilled the back out will be the right thickness for the length of the barrel on the clock. So the way this works is set the stave into the jig, clamp it down, and then I can just move this whole jig underneath the drill press and drill out the corners. I'll start off with a small Forstner bit to get into the corners, and then I'll switch to a larger one to hollow out the rest. I switched over to a larger bit, and really the only reason for doing this is just to remove material faster. I could have done it with the smaller bit and made multiple passes, but with the larger bit, it's just going to go quicker. At this point, most of the material is gone. We'll just use a chisel to clean up the edges. Do a test fit every now and then just to see how you're making progress. This is actually looking pretty good. You can see that there's a little bit of thread showing, enough to catch the nut. So this should be pretty good. It doesn't have to be pretty on the back side, doesn't have to be exact. The mechanism will still fit, and it's something that you will never see unless you turn the clock over. The next step is to cut the stave to the right length. As you can see, if I put this hoop over top of this stave, the stave is much too long. So we need to cut this down to the right length. In order to do that, we'll do that on the bandsaw. I've made another jig here that allows me to do that fairly easily. I'll show you in a minute how that works. Eyeball where you can, around the center of that hole. Measure again, eyeball that in the center. And we'll mark on the stave where the ring sits. Okay, the next step is to take this to the bandsaw and start cutting. There is one thing I forgot to tell you. Before we can cut, we need to realize that these hoops are actually conically shaped. There's an angle here on the sides. So we need to cut this stave at the same angle. Now I know from experience that that angle is about 12 degrees. So we'll show you on the bandsaw how we deal with that 12 degrees, but that's a pretty important dimension to know. If you are unsure, you can always measure it on your own or use an adjustable square to lay up against the sides of the hoop and then transfer that to your bandsaw. The first thing that we're going to do is set the angle of the table of the bandsaw to that 12 degrees that I was just talking about. Now that the table is set, we can take our jig and mount it onto the bandsaw. I do that using a couple small clamps. The next step is to bring in the second piece, which is the pivot, and where you place this is a bit of trial and error. It just depends on how long the stave needs to be. We'll start off right about here, clamp this in place, and then we will try it and see what we get. The last part is a support block which supports the stave as it's being cut. So how this works is the stave with the 7/16 inch hole fits over this pivot. It rests on this support block, and as I bring it into the blade is going to cut a circular cut, which presumably or hopefully matches the diameter of the ring. We'll make a mark on the side of the stave where our mark was that we made with the ring. You just make a cut and see how well it fits. Remember though, you can't stretch it, so don't cut too far. Always go for a long piece. You can always cut off some more. I can see already from my marks that I'm quite long here. So let's just go over to the hoop and see how it fits. But I think it's going to be too big and we'll have to take off a little more. Yeah, it's still quite large, so we're going to have to cut off more. Okay, I've got the stave cut to length. It fits nicely inside the hoop, and I've got it pretty well centered here. Measurements are almost exactly the same. So it looks pretty good. And now we just need to attach this to the hoop. We'll do that by drilling some holes through the ends for screws, which will hold the hoop onto the stave. Now, at this point, you do need to make a choice, and I see I haven't quite got this right. You need to decide where the part of the hoop with the rivets goes. I like to have this at the 3 o'clock position. It doesn't have to be there. In fact, that choice causes one little problem, which is that the balance of the clock isn't quite right, and you have to compensate for that. So having the rivets on the top or the bottom would be better in that regard, but I just like the look of having the rivets here on the 3 o'clock position, and I'll live with the problems that causes. I can deal with it. And now I'll use a Sharpie to mark 2 spots on each end where the screws will go. Exact location is not really important. It's just what you think might be pleasing. But again, the exact spot for those screws is not critical. With those marked, let's drill some holes. Okay, with the holes drilled in the hoop, we need to put it back over the stave where it was before, and then pre-drill for the screws. And replace your battery when it starts to die. With the holes drilled, we need to assemble some screws with a screwdriver that fits. At this point, I just put in 2 screws. There's no point in putting all 4 in. We're going to be taking them out again anyway. Okay. We've got this partially assembled. Now what we need to do is we need to drill a pocket into the back so that we can hang it. And this is where this rivet area starts to cause us a problem. Because if we drill a hole right in the center, where you might expect it to be, then what will happen is the clock will hang slightly sideways. That's because these rivets are adding weight over here. So we have to compensate for that. So we need to move our pivot point until we have the clock hanging straight. And that's pretty much a trial and error. You can see here I'm holding it up on a screwdriver, just eyeballing when it is hanging straight. This looks, I think, pretty good. And then I will mark where the screwdriver was, and then that will line up with the pocket that we have to drill for the hook. With this mark put under the back, I can now transfer that downward. That'll give me an approximate location of where the hook needs to be. For the hook, I like to use these little plates that Rockler sells. I'll leave a link to them in the description. I am not sponsored by Rockler, but I just like these. They work well for me, and that's why I like to use them. Lay them on the line that you made. Draw an outline. Draw an outline of the keyhole in the middle. Start to draw an outline of the outside, but that's definitely not what you want to do. And we'll drill that out. I use a small Forstner bit to do this, and I'll just drill 2 holes by hand. It's not critical. I just go the depth of the thickness of the Forstner bit. 2 together like that. That gives plenty of room for this template or this little plate to sit, and I can later drill holes for the screws. Now, that is the end of the construction phase. I'll take this apart now. We'll do some sanding, finishing, and then put it back together for the final time. Okay, the finishing is done. I sanded with 150 grit sandpaper, and then I applied 2 coats of polyurethane finish. It's an exterior grade finish that I use, but really it could be almost anything, especially if this is going to hang inside, then it doesn't have to be an exterior grade, but it's the finish that I like to use, so that's what I used. So now let's get to the assembly process. First thing we want to do is put in the hook that it will hang on. Next, I like to install the stave into the ring. With the stave installed in the ring, we can install the mechanism. And now the hands. You may have to play with these hands a little bit to keep them from hitting each other. Just give them a little tweak to make sure they clear each other as they go around. These are still hitting a bit. There, that's better. Last step, install a C-cell battery. And the clock is complete. Thank you for watching. I hope this video was informative and enjoyable for you. If you liked it, please hit the subscribe and the like button. And next time, we'll see you for another wine barrel project with 901 Woodworking. Thank you for watching.